So it really brings this idea of emotional shelter, physical shelter, this concept of, I don't know if I feel secure. These are all your vocabulary words, right? I don't know if I feel secure. I don't know if I feel safe. And that's what home really brings. This is why when we leave home for a period of time, we get what?
Homesick.
We can get homesick. Because that homesick really comes from this idea of, I'm somewhere that I don't really feel safe and secure, whether emotionally or physically. I just don't, I don't know. I don't have the supports. I can't speak the language. I'm not sure they really like me. I'm not sure if they really understand me. I look kind of different. I dress kind of different. I act kind of different. I speak kind of different. I sound kind of different. I really want to be with people who look like me and act like me and can relate to me. That makes me feel safe. And that's what normally home is. And then there are places we go where we never ever been there before. Right? We've never been there before. We get off the plane. You ever had that type of situation? Where you've been somewhere, you go somewhere, you stop driving, you enter the city limits, and you go, you never been there, you go. Or you get off the airport and you go, why do I feel like this? Yo, man, I feel like I'm at home. I've never been here before. For me, it's kind of weird. For me, it's New York City. Although, now here's something I'll share about me that's weird. I'm not sure where I was technically born. Okay, now I'll tell you why. My birth certificate says I was born in Baltimore, Maryland. However, I have a New York City Social Security number. So I'm trying to figure out, so unfortunately both of my parents are passed and I never really got a chance to ask them how I got, because I didn't find out until I was an adult that I had a New York City Social Security number. So I'm trying to figure out in Manhattan. So either A, my parents are not my real parents, or B, something else happened. I don't know, they just happened to be in New York and applied for it there, but it still should have gave me a Maryland number. Well, they still should have sent my parents to Maryland. I'm not sure why I have a New York City Social Security number. It begins with 055, which means that's New York City. So what's weird is that when I go to New York, I always get this feeling like, as soon as I get to, so you go through New Jersey, or you get exit 9, I start to feel in that exit 9. Getting kind of weird. And then 10, 11, and then once you get to 11, I think, if I'm right, I think you get to 11, if I'm right, you're at you're close to the tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel. I might be wrong. But once you, somewhere, I think it's like exit 11 or something like that, you're close to the Lincoln Tunnel. And as you approaching the Lincoln Tunnel, you start to see the New York skyline. Like all the famous picture that you see, like all the skyline. And once I see the skyline off of I-95, and I drive everywhere. I mean, and when I'm in America, I drive everywhere. And I don't get that feeling in any other city. I don't get that feeling in any other city. But New York, it's just like I feel, and when I actually get to the city and I'm actually got through the tunnel, I paid my toll, and I find somewhere to park. Right? I find, because in New York City, that's like the big thing is to find parking, right? You find somewhere to park your car, and you just leave it until you let it leave. You don't ever touch your car ever again, right? And it's expensive. I mean, you're gonna pay about $100 a day, but it's expensive. So you find somewhere to park your car, and if your hotel doesn't have free parking, which a lot of times they charge you, and then like once you get through that transaction of paying the guy, well not paying the guy, but getting your ticket to park your car and finding a place, you know, and if you're really lucky, you'll find an on-street parking that is free, but that's almost impossible. And then when you finally like, get out of the car, it's like, man, and you like walk in the street, it's like, I'm at home, right? I never lived in New York a day in my life. I've been to New York a lot, but every time, whether I go for a couple hours or I stay for a couple of days, I feel like I'm at home. And the moment where it's time for me to leave, I get this feeling of depression, like I'm leaving home. So much so, my connection with New York is so much so that after 9/11, the weekend after 9/11, 9/11 happened on a Tuesday, that weekend, I was so sad. I went to New York. It was almost like going home to make sure the family, even though I really don't have family there, it was almost like I had to go home to make sure the family was okay. It's weird. It's a weird connection I have with New York. I absolutely love that city. And I've been to many major cities in the world. And to me, there is no place like New York. To me, it's a great place. So this idea of home also can be spiritual. Because what I have really with New York is a spiritual connection. Right? I have a spiritual connection. I mean, it could be a rainy day in New York, and I'm going to be happy just because I'm in New York. Now again, I don't know if it's because I was actually born there or something weird is going on in New York. I don't know what it is. But when I'm there, I feel at home. I can go there at 3 o'clock in the morning, not have a hotel room, and figure it out. Whereas if I go to Miami 3 o'clock in the morning and not have a hotel room, I'm like, oh, where am I going to sleep? You know, you're frantic. Because this is not your home, this is not your place. You need to find a place to sleep. You gotta have a hotel room. I can go to New York anytime. Go. Put me on a plane right now and take me to New York. You have it. Okay? So not only is shelter an idea of physical, emotional, but it can also be very spiritual. You can also have very spiritual connections with places. Yesterday we watched the Mountain Men television show. And these people, the reason why they endure such harsh climate, such harsh weather, is because of what? Because they emotionally like it, but I think they also feel some type of spiritual connection with that type of environment. That motivates them every day to go through what we could consider to be very hard work. Would you consider it to be very hard work, what they were doing? Extremely hard. So, this idea of home is second to what we do to survive, what our brain forces us to do to survive. First is what? Find what? Find food, water, and food. That's your first thing your brain's concerned with. And the second thing is shelter. And again, physical shelter, which leads to emotional and possibly spiritual shelter. So when we think of home, we're really thinking of shelter. We're really thinking of a place where we could be, for a moment, we could be vulnerable, right? What do we mean by vulnerable? Where we don't have to have our shield and sword ready, right? We don't have to be it's a place where we can just kind of relax, right? Now here's the interesting thing about home. We talked the passage that we dealt with yesterday dealt with home from a historical standpoint. As I said, I forgot who said that over here yesterday, but somebody said that that the passage defined home from a historical, from history, from an idea of history, and that's absolutely right. So here's the interesting thing about home. The idea of home has taken on a different definition at about the Industrial Revolution. At the time of the Industrial Revolution, this idea of home, definition of home, actually changed. It's weird. So man was living basically for thousands of years, and not until about the mid-1700s, depending on when you want to define the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but not until about the mid-1700s did this idea of home really change. And let me explain. Before the Industrial Revolution, home was an issue of community. That security, that shelter that you wanted was based on all of us being together. Got me? You understand me? Yeah. So you got shelter from being with the group. And we still see this in tribal people who still live in a tribal way, right? In tribes. The shelter is being with the group. In fact, if someone doesn't play by the rules of the group, of the society, what happens? They kick him out, which gives him what? Which makes him vulnerable to many things. Again, physical vulnerability, mental vulnerability, spiritual vulnerability, right? No one wants to be outcast. And that's not the famous rap group, right? No one wants to be outcast. No one wants to be outside the group. Because all their shelter, that emotional shelter, physical shelter, spiritual shelter, comes with being in the group. You eat because you're in the group. You have relationships because you're in the group. You laugh because you're in the group. So being put out of that group is the anti-definition, or the antonym rather, of home. It's the opposite of home. The group is home. This is why what? You had some people who are what? Nomadic. And what is nomadic? Meaning what?
It's like people who live in deserts.
They move. Yeah. You still have people who live in Africa and parts of Asia who still live a nomadic lifestyle, meaning they move, they travel, they move. Somebody said gypsies, right? Right. Here in Saudi Arabia, some tribes were nomadic tribes. They moved around the desert. Right? So home wasn't just a structure or a place. Home was the what? The group. As long as I'm with the group, I'm okay. As long as I'm with the group, I eat. As long as with the group, I have security. As long as with the group, I laugh. As long as I'm with the group and something happens to me, I know there's someone there to help me. I have a sense of security. So you got secure, and then you have security. And then, even in the Middle Ages, this idea of group still existed. Can anyone explain why? this idea still of groups still existed even in the Middle Ages during feudalism. In fact, feudalism was all about group. Anybody remember that from the history class, world history in high school? Well, think about in feudalism. You had a landowner, right? And he owned a bunch of land, right? And then he would do what? He would have serfs, right? Who lived on the land, right? And the serfs would what? Take care of the land in exchange for the landowner allowing them to live on the land. You had castles, right? Was it just the rich person who owned the castle who lived in the castle? Who lived in the castle? Everybody. The whole community lived in the castle. The whole community lived in the castle. So this idea of property, home, so when we talk about home, we're talking about property. That's what property really is. It's home. Right? That's what property really is. It's home. Everyone has a car. Most people have a car outside, right? Okay? If something happens to their car, it's like something happened to your home. When you're in your car, you get to do certain things. You get to have a moment of vulnerability. That's why you start to sing to yourself while you're driving. You do certain things that you wouldn't do outside your home. So this idea of property is home. They're synonymous. So although the wealthy landowner owned the castle, owned land, the people did not perceive it as really his. It wasn't private property. It was actually public property. You get it? Because everybody lived there. Everyone had what? Access to it. Everyone had access to it. So even though it's kind of like home. My home now is the father. Right? I have 2 kids. And then I buy things for me. I go to the store and I say, wow, I really like this. This is going to be mine. But what happens when I get in the house? What happens when I get in the house? They take it. They're like, and it's mine now. And if I try to take it back from them, what? They cry and yell. It becomes theirs now. Because the idea of property in their mind is a public thing. What's yours is mine, what's mine is yours. It's public. Even though you bought it, right? We all have access to it. This is all home. But at the point of the Industrial Revolution, that all changed. At the point of the Industrial Revolution, that all changed. Then we went from saying public access to saying what? I'm going to deny access. So the idea of property was now denying access. It's mine. No, only people that are my family can live here. Stay off my property. So the idea of home and property went from public access to denying access. And that's a relatively new concept when you think about world history. And you draw a timeline, and when this idea of private property really comes into play. You think about it as you drive Saudi Arabia, as you drive Riyadh, you see everyone has villas, and what's in their villa? these big walls, right?
Yeah.
But if you really think about it on the timeline of history, that's a relatively new concept. It's a relatively new concept in man's history that we put up walls that we deny access. Now, home is a place where we make sure we have a lock on the door. We have a gun in the house. So if somebody invades our home, right? Because if they invade our home, they invade our security, they invade our sense of shelter. They invade our physical space, our mental space, and our spiritual space. But that's a new concept in human history. And it starts with the Industrial Revolution, about 200 to 300 years old. That this idea of property, this idea of home, changes from public access to denying access. Now here's the interesting thing. Will the age of access, because that's what technology is bringing, access, right? More people, you get online, you can connect, right? You can have connectivity, therefore you have access. Will technology create a shift again where we go back to property being that of allowing everyone access? So how will technology change home? This concept of home. Because when we really talk about this concept of home, we're not just talking about a place with two doors, walls, and a window. We're really talking about property. Let's take it a step further. In your country and in other people's countries, one of the major issues is what? Immigration. Immigration is a problem in almost every country, especially countries that are doing well, right? Developed countries and developing countries that are doing well economically. People, what? Want to migrate there. They want to be a part of that. They still have this what? Idea of what? Oh, this is a place that's doing well. We need to gain access to it. Whereas the developed countries that have immigration laws, well, every country has immigration laws that say what? We want to deny you access. You got to get a visa. You know, you need to meet certain qualifications before we allow you in our country. That's the denying of access. And in America, and even in Saudi Arabia and other places of the world, it's a big problem. Because what? People will try to gain that access by any means necessary. However they can. Sneak in, jump across the border, whatever they have to do. Lie. Right? Creates human trafficking. Creates a lot of world issues. This idea of immigration, which is really an idea of access. So how will technology, how will the generation that you guys will lead change immigration laws? What's the new city that they're thinking about putting $500 billion in? Noom. How Noom is being promoted and advertised is a technological city, right? Place. And if you look at the advertising, the commercial that I saw for Noom, it's supposed to be what? Diverse. Based on what? Diversity. So is this an indication? Is this an indication that technology meets diversity? And this is a place that's going to be the pinnacle, the paradigm, the example, the model for what? Access again. That we live in a place that public access is important. We live in a place where home is everywhere. Now, what's the problem? So let's extend the thinking here. What's the problem of public access or public property versus private property as it relates to social responsibility? Oops, ability. So what's the problem with public property versus private property as it relates to social responsibility?
I think you have to learn another language, or you have to learn more languages.
All right, so on a public property versus private property, which one would you have to learn another language?
With public.
With public property. So public property is more of a burden because communication may be harder. Would you agree?
You have to be social.
And you have to be social. And there's some effort, some energy that needs to be social, i.e. learning another language. With the understanding that everybody in the public space may not speak the same language as you. And that language you may have to learn another language as it relates to urban. So learning another, cultural language, right? Neighborhood language. North versus south, east versus west type of thing. You gonna say something?
Yeah, in the public you may have to follow more rules.
In the public space, you may have, that's an excellent point. So that's an excellent point. In the public space, you have to follow more rules. Versus in a private space, what? You make your own rules. If it's my private property, I do what I want on it. Right? However, if it's a public space, I have to respect the rights of other people around me, which becomes very complicated. Which means that people in a public space, they have to be socially responsible. You have to pick up the trash behind you. You have to watch how loud you speak, or how loud you play your music, or how you drive. Right? Not to do what? Not to take away from the next person. In America, we have a concept: your rights end when the next man's rights begin. And that's hard, that's complex, that's a very difficult concept. So in the private space, you say, look, I do whatever I want. It's all about my rights. So if you don't like my rights, and if you don't like my rules, then stay off of my property. In fact, I'm going to give you a litmus test. I'm going to give you a litmus test to make sure you fit what happens in my property. And that's what we call immigration. So the idea of public access, the idea of public property, which is really idea of home, versus the idea of private property, which is about home, is one of a matter of history, of a matter of politics, one of a matter of nature and environment, which is a matter of science, becomes very complicated. So it may be easier to say, you know what, we're going to create this border, and because this public thing is so complicated, we're just going to do our simple thing right here. Now, what's the drawback of doing that simple right thing right here? What's the drawback of creating borders? What's the drawback? What's the major drawback of creating borders?
To make laws.
The drawback.
Disadvantage.
The disadvantage of creating borders is what? Borders do what?
Isolate
They
you.
limit you
Isolate you.
and they isolate you. That's two good words. They limit you and they isolate you. Two great words. And as we move on to this next frontier of technology, of access, right now we can't live in a box. We can't live in a situation where we're limited and isolated. Because there's a whole new universe that we're about to tap into. So we need the collective what? Efforts of everyone to tackle this new challenge. And then eventually 200-300 years after we tackle this new challenge, then we'll shift back again to what? Private access. But right now in this age of technology, this age of access, it's very important that we what? That we have diversity, that we not limit ourselves, that we not isolate ourselves, because we have a challenge ahead of us. We have a major challenge ahead of us as human beings. Does anyone disagree with that? You can disagree. Look, you can disagree with it. Anybody disagree with that? It's okay to disagree with that. Anyone think what I'm saying is absolutely crazy? So, when you look at this chapter, home, don't just look at it from the perspective of house. You know, in Saudi Arabia, we had these type of homes. In America, they had these type of homes in the South. No. Home is actually second only to food and water. It's second to food and water. If you were on a deserted island by yourself alone, the first thing you're gonna look for is food source and a water source. The next thing you're gonna do is build a shelter. And some of us may do it in combination.